Today we're going to be discussing linguistic morphological typology, which is the process of classifying languages based on how analytic or synthetic they are. But what does all this mean? So in linguistics we have something called a morpheme, which is the smallest meaningful unit in a language. Morphemes sometimes join together to form words that have meaning. One example is the suffix s in English, which indicates plurality. Another example is the suffix ing, which denotes a gerund. We can divide languages based on the ratio of morphemes to words, that is, how many morphemes are in the average word. For clarity's sake, here's an example. In English, the word car contains one morpheme, or a bit of text that communicates information. The word handshakes, for example, contains three morphemes, the word hand, the word shake, and the suffix s to show plurality. If a language has many morphemes per word on average, they are said to be synthetic. If they instead keep morphemes part of separate words to string together a sentence, they are said to be analytic. One more definition to know before we continue is inflection. Inflection is the process by which a word is modified to express different grammatical categories such as tense, case, voice, aspect, person, number, gender, mood, antecedent, and definiteness. The inflection of verbs is called conjugation, and one can refer to the inflection of nouns, adjectives, adverbs, pronouns, and others as declension. The more inflection a language has, the more synthetic it is, and the less inflection, the more analytic. It is these two characteristics, inflection and morpheme-to-words ratio, that we can use to determine whether or not a language is analytic or synthetic. We now have our two categories. Analytic, which denotes a low morpheme-to-word ratio and little inflection, and synthetic, which denotes a high morpheme-to-word ratio and lots of inflection. It's important to know that very few languages can be described as purely analytic or purely synthetic. Like many things in life, they're on a continuum. Within the category of analytic morphology, we find isolating languages. Isolating languages are languages with a low morpheme-to-word ratio. In the most extreme case, each word contains only one morpheme. However, a language can be analytic even with a high morpheme-to-word ratio, so long as those morphemes are not inflectional. For example, Mandarin Chinese has many compound words, giving it a moderately high ratio of morphemes per word. But since it has almost no inflectional morphemes at all to convey grammatical relationships, it is a very analytic language. Within the category of synthetic morphology, we find the denominations of fusional, agglutinative, and polysynthetic. It's important to note that agglutinative and fusional languages are two opposite ends of a continuum, determined by whether or not a single morpheme can represent just one or multiple pieces of grammatical information, respectively. Many languages fall somewhere in the middle, not at either end. Fusional languages are languages marked by their usage of a single inflectional morpheme to denote multiple grammatical, syntactic, or semantic features. This is just a really fancy way of saying that they use one modification to give multiple pieces of information, like gender and tense, for example. Usually, these added morphemes contain multiple bits combined or shortened into one morpheme, so they don't make sense when separated from the word. This is a key feature in fusional languages. A good example is in the second person singular preterite conjugation of the Spanish verb meaning to think. The sole morpheme aste tells us multiple pieces of information, the verb tense and the person, that is, the second person singular. Agglutinative languages are characterized by their encoding of one grammatical feature per morpheme. That is, each morpheme added corresponds only to one grammatical category, like gender, instead of multiple at once, as we saw in our Spanish example from earlier. Agglutinative languages' morphemes don't change when added into different words, making for simpler pronunciation. Unlike in fusional languages, morphemes are easily separated from words while maintaining meaning. Japanese, Korean, and many indigenous languages of the Americas are largely agglutinative. In Japanese, words with added morphemes that signify grammatical meaning are combined to create a sentence. Take this example. Each word is divided by a vertical line. Note the capitalized words. They are the grammatical information given by each morpheme. Those morphemes are brought together to form one sentence, which has the meaning, "The sun rises in the eastern sky." Finally, polysynthetic languages consist of words that have many morphemes strung together to convey meaning. They have a very high morpheme-to-word ratio. It's important to note that polysynthetic languages can either be fusional or agglutinative, depending on how much information is given by a morpheme and if the morphemes can be separated from the word and still have meaning. Oftentimes, polysynthetic morphologies give rise to long words which may seem unusual to speakers of more analytic languages. One such case is captured in a viral clip of a meteorologist, in my opinion, perfectly saying the name of a certain Welsh town.
Just up the road from Llanfair Pwllgwyn, go get a Quindrobol, Llan Cecilia go go go.
An example of a polysynthetic language is Nahuatl, the language spoken by the Aztecs, which is spoken by 1.7 million people today. It is both polysynthetic and agglutinative, meaning morphemes generally only carry one piece of grammatical information. An example from Nahuatl is this word. It can be broken down as such. Its meaning is, "I shall make somebody give something to you." To summarize, languages fall into two categories when we talk about morphology: analytic and synthetic. Analytic denotes a low morpheme-to-word ratio and little inflection. Synthetic denotes a high morpheme-to-word ratio and lots of inflection. Within analytic, we have isolating languages. Isolating languages have a low morpheme-to-word ratio. Often, morphemes are isolated into standalone words to represent meaning. Under synthetic, we have fusional, agglutinative, and polysynthetic languages. Fusional languages assign multiple grammatical features to just one morpheme. Examples of fusional languages include many Romance languages. Agglutinative languages are marked by their usage of multiple morphemes, each carrying one piece of grammatical information. Polysynthetic languages string together many morphemes to create long words, sometimes creating sentences comprised of just one word. Remember, they can be either fusional or agglutinative. Undoubtedly, I've made various mistakes in this video, but what is life if not learning from mistakes? Thanks for watching.